Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. This is take two of my weekly astrology forecast. I faithfully recorded one for you on the weekend, but I had a really comical and actually kind of appropriate astrological technical problem with the video that's rendered it not usable. I told the whole story in a special video that I'm posting all about Mercury squares Saturn and the film Interstellar. So that should be uploaded soon. Check that out. So just to stay on track with always offering you a weekly forecast, however, I'm going to go through this week's forecast maybe a little more swiftly, just to give you a little something to go forward in the week with. We know that we just came off of a weekend that had a really powerful full moon in Taurus conjunct Uranus, so that can bring a lot of interesting surprises and sort of symbolizes a feeling of change and upcoming change that's moving through our lives and society. In my original video, I relayed that part of those Uranus surprises popped up for my partner and I. We were looking at the full moon on Halloween night and we saw what I guess we could call a UFO. It's an unidentified object to us. We don't know what it was, but this red pulsing light moving across the moon. So I thought it was rather appropriate because it was definitely a Uranus surprise on a full moon night. So I'll just go through the week with you now. Sorry if I'm in a bit of a funny mood. It's been an interesting couple of days. We'll start off with today, which is Monday, November the 2nd. The moon at around 2 a.m. entered playful and mercurial Gemini, which knowing that Mercury and Saturn are forming a bit of a square and Mercury is about to move direct, this interesting Mercury is presiding over this moon in Gemini and giving it a really interesting, playful, mischievous, and active kind of buzz or flavor. So this is the vibe that we're starting the week with. I think we can all feel the charge and a sense of expecting the unexpected. Then that Mercury ruled moon moves on to form a sextile with Chiron, bringing up the theme of healing ongoing wounds, bringing that into our emotive and intuitive and lunar awareness. And then later in the afternoon, Mercury ruled moon in Gemini forms a nice air trine with Venus in Libra, which should give Monday evening a really good feel-good and creative and maybe somewhat romantic vibe. Certainly it could create a backdrop for very animated or romantic conversation or a really creative use of words and language. Then we get to Tuesday, November the 3rd, and this is a huge day. As we know, politically, this is the end of the election, and then from here on in, I guess all of the votes will be counted and allocated in the United States. So it's a bit uncanny that Mercury goes direct that day. So Mercury, the planet that rules over messages, message delivery, the flow of currency, calculating and adding up data. Moving direct, it means that all of these matters will start to become a little bit clearer and more easier to kind of comb out and work with and ascertain as Mercury speeds up and moves along. But I'm sure it won't be without some surprises, because we're in this envelope of time where we had a Mercury square Saturn on November the 1st that's caused some disruptions and blockages and delays in communication efforts that will repeat again at the end of the week now that Mercury's gone direct again. So I think in that envelope of time, there's going to be a bit of sorting and figuring out that will be quite intensive. And then hopefully after Friday, things will start to get a little bit more sorted and a little clearer as we move along. Generally speaking, though, Mercury will be making a lot of very active aspects as it moves forward. It will repeat many of the aspects that it recently did while retrograde. This square with Saturn on Friday being the first in that repeating chain, where we will revisit some of the themes that have been activated in the last couple of weeks. Then the moon forms a sextile with Mars later in the morning on Tuesday, and Tuesday is Mars's day. The moon is very active in Gemini. Mars is really hot and active, and maybe a little bit volatile, being retrograde. As we know, it's quite an intense placement for Mars and Mars topics now. So that could be a really stimulating transit. It could be very physical, very activating, maybe a lot of animated talking, or maybe just a need to kind of get moving. So it's very activating, at least for a couple of hours in the late morning. It might shape the quality of time in some manner like that. Then later in the afternoon, moon in Gemini forms a square with Neptune. Neptune has a real way with adding an illusory, nebulous, and kind of time warping effect to the proceedings. So when the moon, which is connected to our intuition, our emotional expression, and even our body reserves to some extent, forms that square every month, with Neptune, it can make for a time where maybe emotions are a bit expanded or amplified, or the way that we're describing them or experiencing them is really nebulous and amplified and a bit disorienting. And it could be a really good time to just pull back and do creative, imaginative things rather than trying to be really clear, crisp, or constructive. If that is feeling like a bit of an issue for you around that time, just pay attention to that aspect. Then on Wednesday, November the 4th, the moon forms a trine with Mercury quite early in the morning. And then, you know, it's pretty early in the morning, and it's not likely, at least in specific time where I am, that's going to really directly color the way that people are talking or feeling or thinking, but it could leave a little bit of a signature or a resonance of activation on the early morning. And that's typically a positive aspect, you know, and especially in an air sign, an air trine between the moon and Mercury can really facilitate clear communications and the flow of information. And now that Mercury is newly moving direct, there could be some positive windows in the early morning on Wednesday, which incidentally is Mercury's day of the week, that could help us communicate and maybe find the words, or maybe emotional vocabulary, or articulating what it is inside that's kind of sometimes hard to explain or grasp. At this point, the moon goes void of course. That's the last aspect that the moon will make before changing signs. So traditionally, that creates a little pocket, or the moon's not really linking up with anyone. So that's a time where it's good to not begin anything that's super high stakes during that pocket of time. Rather, it could be a really good time to finish up loose ends of things that you've already got in motion, and save some of the higher stake new beginnings for maybe a little like later, at least until after the moon changes signs, and maybe even after that Mercury square Saturn on Friday, because I think we'll still be sorting a lot of things out after the retrograde time, picking up the pieces and putting things back in their proper places might be a bit of a theme for the upcoming days. So just to take note of that moon void, of course. Then in the afternoon, the moon changes signs. It moves into Cancer, its home sign, very like watery and emotive and intuitive. The emotions can tend to be a little bit more profound or raw or all-encompassing around this time. Hence, triggering us to kind of feel like maybe we want to retreat and be a little bit more insular, protective, private. Then, you know, at this point, the void, of course, is over because now the moon is in a new sign. So if there is something that you need to tend to, maybe it's more opportune then. But to just bear in mind that feelings and emotions might be a little bit more potent and all-encompassing at that time. So just checking in with that. Then we get to Thursday, November the 5th. The moon being in Cancer is in a cardinal sign, and many planetary players are also in cardinal signs, really shaping and coloring the quality of time. Now, anytime signs are in the same mode like this, it means that they're going to be forming either an opposition or a square aspect angle with each other. So the moon in Cancer is now entering a couple of days where it's going to make hard aspects with all of these planets. So if we're feeling really raw and, you know, vulnerable, and emotions are running a bit high, and there's a need for self-protection or retreat, it could be exacerbated a little bit by the fact that the moon is now about to make a chain of very active aspects, some positive, but some a bit intense, because it will, like, as I say, make oppositions and squares with the cardinal planets. The first in that chain, of course, is the moon square Chiron just after midnight, which could inflame or bring up topics of inner wounds, a feeling of poking or activating a sore spot. It's kind of happening overnight, so I don't think that it would be a really overpowering or overbearing signature for the day, but it might be a bit of a theme for a couple of hours. Then the moon in Cancer forms a sextile with Uranus in Taurus. This could be a really nice passage for creativity or sudden insight. It's this really powerful moon working in an interesting collaborative harmony with Uranus's really powerful kind of revolutionary energies. And it's interesting because this shows the journey that the moon has made since the weekend. On the weekend, the moon and Uranus were together in the same sign in Taurus. Now, Uranus moves really slow, so the moon is moving on and now is moving a little bit of ways away from Uranus and able to make a sextile angle or aspect to Uranus. So it's activating with Uranus in a slightly different fashion than it was really potently consolidating that energy with the new moon on the weekend. So moving on into later in the morning, the moon in Cancer forms a square with Venus and Libra. Even though the square aspect can be a bit edgy and activating, a square between the moon and Venus isn't typically, you know, negative or difficult. It could just be an expansion of emotions, an expansion of an amplification of indulgences or pleasure. Venus is really powerfully placed in Libra in its home sign, so it does bring a lot of good things, a lot of happiness and mending of the ways, and attraction and creativity and luxury. And the moon is really powerfully placed in Cancer, bringing really potent and empathic connections and really, really raw emotional expressions. So the two are, you know, objectively pretty fruitful and potentially really positive, but they're just really activating each other through the square. So it could just be a couple of hours where maybe we're feeling a bit more romantic or a bit more emotional in a sentimental or kind of fun way, or craving indulgences or craving affection and attention. And then moving on into later in the afternoon, early evening, the moon in Cancer forms a trine with the sun in Scorpio. This is a water trine. And this is a time when the moon is kind of around the middle of what's called the waning gibbous phase of the lunar cycle. It's like the moon is really full on the weekend, but now the moon is moving away from its opposition with the sun, and it's starting to decrease in light. So it's still kind of full of light and full, but the light is gradually whittling down as the moon tracks closer and closer to the same location as the sun. And then that's where we get the new moon event in Scorpio on November the 15th. So we're just starting to travel down toward that new moon passage now. So that moon trine sun is the moon and the sun connecting through water signs in a really powerful way, midway the waning gibbous cycle. And it's just bringing the really potent emotions of the moment into some strong harmony with this very contemplative and penetrating focus and awareness and energies of Scorpio season now. And then in the evening, the moon forms a square with Mars. This is a little bit more of an abrasive one, potentially because the moon is so potent and emotive in Cancer in its home sign. Mars is really potent in its home sign of Aries and extra volatile while moving retrograde. So this is a little bit of a reversal, because when the moon was square Venus, it was, amplifying indulgences and a good feeling, but in a really strong manner. Now we have an amplifying of maybe frustrations or something that's, poking at our emotions or causing us maybe to be a little bit more reactive or frustrated. It might not necessarily coincide with something that concrete that happens. It just might be a couple of hours in the nighttime where something inflames and comes to the surface. And we might need to take a few deep breaths and step back a little bit, because it could be a little bit all-encompassing for a few hours. Then we get to Friday, November the 6th. We have quite a busy, active day of aspects. This is the day where the moon makes a chain of really potent aspects. Remember, along the lines of, the edgy aspects that can occur between cardinal signs. And so the moon is in Cancer, but then also we have the repeat of Mercury square Saturn that I mentioned from earlier in the video. This time Mercury is moving direct, so some themes, anything that we had to work through on Sunday, maybe there's a bit of a repeat of those topics or issues now on Friday for us to revisit and rework through, but maybe having a little bit more clarity moving forward. So that aspect happens shortly after midnight, so it kind of kicks off that chain of events for the whole day. And as you can see from the listing, it's a pretty active day. And I don't know what it is about the timing, but often it seems like there's a lot of active aspects on Friday. I don't know if it's just me. The moon forms a trine with Neptune pretty much at the same time that it squares Saturn just a little while later, and that makes a very moody and illusory kind of mood that's very deep and meditative. Then the moon forms a chain of oppositions with the planets that are in Capricorn, an opposition with Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn for most of the day on Friday, one after another. Just kind of heightening our feelings around some of the heavier responsibilities that those planets are pointing to for us this year that we're working on or grappling with. Then the moon forms a square with Mercury, which is interesting because that's almost got a bit of an echo to the Mercury square Saturn from earlier in the day. That can kind of just create a few hours of a feeling of the emotional expression getting a little bit thwarted or confused, or a little edgy with the moon and Mercury not really linking up or matching up in the easiest way. But the moon was really quickly, so it only lasts a couple of hours, but it could be worth paying attention to, especially if it's a day where we're dealing with picking up the pieces of this Mercury retrograde cycle. The Mercury square Saturn has put something back on our plate to figure out. The moon is making all these really potent oppositions and squares with the cardinal planets. Might be a bit of a frustrating day, so there could be something in our emotional communication that wells up, that tries to come forth, but that little edgy passage between the moon and Mercury might make it feel a little bit tight or hard to explain or hard to make sense of. The moon goes void of course at that point. That means it's about to change signs, so a few hours there's a window where it's not traditionally best to start anything high stakes or new that you want to take hold long term. And then just before midnight, the moon moves into Leo, and the void of course ends, and then Leo carries us into a more active and fiery and passionate lunar mood for the weekend. Then moving along, we get to Saturday, November the 7th. Now that the moon is in Leo, it forms a trine with Chiron, which could be a really healing and inspirational moment for that theme of ongoing wounds. That's at the beginning of the day for a couple of hours. Then the moon forms a square with Uranus. So the moon is in fixed fire Leo and Uranus is in fixed earth Taurus. So that can cause some sparks of sudden insight, emotional surprises, outbursts, this sort of thing. So it could be interesting to harness for creativity, but also be a little patient if things are a little strange or some curveballs pop up. And again, it might not be anything that actually concretely happens. It might just be more of a feeling. Since it's the moon, it's always what the moon is kind of connecting to in the outer planets and picking up on and then translating and transmitting down to us in a more intimate way. It kind of brings Uranus's edgy and unexpected energies down to us in a little bit of a surprising manner. And again, it's interesting to track because as we know, on the weekend, the moon was together with Uranus. Then the moon moved on to form a sextile, and now the moon's moved on to form a square angle to Uranus. So it's interesting to just kind of track how the moon is moving away in its cycle from a planet, and it's now interacting with it from a different perspective. And then that's it for Saturday. And then we get to Sunday, November the 8th, the last day of the week in this weekly forecast. The moon in Leo forms a trine with Mars, which is a very physically activating aspect that could cause a lot of bursts of energy and a need to be physical, a need to move, a need to have some catharsis, getting a lot of bottled up tensions and frustrations out of the body, out of the nervous system, to have some release. Could be a really great way to harness that moon trine Mars early Sunday morning. And then the last lunar aspect of the week happens just before sunrise, and that's the moon square the sun. So you remember earlier in the week on Thursday, we had the moon trine the sun, and that was midway through the waning gibbous phase of the lunar cycle. Now we're at the point where the moon is perfectly at 90-degree angle from the sun, and that is the moon entering the last quarter phase. So if you look up and you happen to see the moon at that time, it looks like it's divided perfectly in half. And that's because exactly one half of the moon is reflecting the light as per it would from that 90-degree angle. And then from here, the moon starts to whittle down into the waning crescent and eventually joins the sun for the new moon phase. Again, that's coming up on November the 15th in Scorpio, which is sure to be really potent and interesting. And we'll talk more about that soon. So thanks again for tuning in. Sorry about the delay. Just never know sometimes with technical difficulties. And if you're curious to find out what happened and my astrological take on the nature of the technological difficulties and a bit of a storytelling effort on my part with that, check out that other video, Mercury squares Saturn and the themes of interstellar. Thank you again for tuning in. Reach out if you'd like to connect. Take care.